Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Encountering Homelessness webinar. Thanks so much for your patience. We're still having people trickle in attendance, and so thanks for bearing with us while we're waiting for those folks to come, but we're going to go ahead and get started now. In the webinar currently, all attendees, except for this main phone where I'm joined by some staff who will be helping facilitate the webinar. All of the attendees are muted currently, so we won't be able to hear you if you are speaking in the conference call. But there's a location in the webinar software where you can enter questions. You should see it under the questions tab, and we'd be happy to facilitate those and answer any questions that you may have throughout the webinar, depending on the discussion-based nature of this webinar. We may unmute attendees as well, but for the start, we're going to just go ahead and let people write in questions. And so if you're having any trouble with the webinar, if you're not able to access certain portions, or if you're having trouble for any reason, please go ahead and let me know through the questions tab as well. My name is Jasper Vaughn. I'm the development coordinator here at the Alliance, and want to just thank you again for joining us and for being responsive and passionate about ending homelessness. We're really excited to be able to connect with a broad range of our donors and folks on our donor newsletter. And I just wanted to preface today's webinar by saying that our audience is pretty diverse today. We've got representation from quite a few different sectors of our donor base and of our partners and friends at the Alliance. We've got folks who are service providers, as well as interested donors who are looking to get more information. And so we're going to try and give you content and resources that speak to your unique needs and questions, but because we've got so much ground to cover and people coming from very different places, we're really going to rely on the question and answer format in order to get all of you folks the resources you're looking for and the information that if you're a service provider, you can pass on to your donors and folks in your community and partners. And if you're a donor who's interested in learning more, that you get the information that you need in answer to your questions. So I'd like to also introduce the two other folks who are on the line who will be sharing during this webinar with me. We have with me from Miriams Kitchen, we have Jer. Jer, do you want to say hello real quick?
Hi, folks. It's good to be here.
And then we have Ben Cattle-Knoll, who works in the capacity building arm of the Alliance as well.
Hey, everybody.
So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jer, who's going to run through a brief overview of the work he does as part of the outreach team at Miriams Kitchen. He's going to give you an overview of some of the topics that we're going to discuss in this Encountering Homelessness webinar, and I'll let him take it away for a few minutes, and then we're going to follow that up with question and answer time. So without further ado, let's jump into the material.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank you guys at the Alliance for inviting me over and share a little bit about my work. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to everyone who's joined in. So I guess I'll start by just telling you a little bit about the organization I work for, Miriams Kitchen in Washington, D.C. It was founded in 1983, mainly as a soup kitchen, a place to serve individuals experiencing homelessness, mainly meals, but also, some basic need items like, socks and those kinds of things. It gradually developed, but explicitly in 2012, the leadership decided to shift the mission to, instead of providing needs items, to actually try to end chronic homelessness, I should say. We know it is a solvable problem, and that's currently the mission. So there's, as well as all the case management services, there's advocacy and things like that. So I'm part of the outreach team, which is quite a new initiative there, and the purpose of outreach is the core purpose. There's lots of things that go along with it, but the core purpose is to try to reconnect people who are experiencing homelessness with services, to get people to the services they need and to ultimately connect them with a housing resource and end homelessness for each individual. So we try to base all our work on the principles of maintaining the dignity of the client, on trying to build community for folks, to have the client inform the work that we do, so the key, the first step, outreach. We go out into the community, and we want to try to get to know all the individuals in our area who are experiencing homelessness. I have to say, I really love my work. I really enjoy it. I meet some really, really interesting people, and it's really opened my eyes in the sort of year and a half I've been doing it. So we try to build trust with people. Unfortunately, what we found is that homelessness is very isolating, the experience of homelessness. So people become very disconnected from services, but just from society and the world generally, for all sorts of reasons. So, our first job is to try to get to know folks, to really meet them where they are, literally in the community, but also, to try to just develop services in a way that they can access despite, vulnerabilities that they might have. And to just build trust and build rapport, get to know them, talk to them, listen to them, listen to what it is they need. And sometimes we can move directly to connection to services. People are ready straight away, and sometimes it takes a little longer. People have to learn to trust us. So this is I guess the final step is to connect people to services. So as outreach workers, we support people in navigating different systems. Often the systems can be very bureaucratic. Anything from as simple as getting an ID to getting Medicaid, getting connected to the services that people need for different issues that they might be having in their lives. So a big part of the work is developing partnerships with other organizations and leveraging those and working to support people like core service agencies in providing things like mental health services, working with ACT teams, doing ACT referrals. So for anyone who may not know, ACT teams provide assertive community treatment. That's what it stands for. They provide treatment in the community, and it's also a kind of outreach. So they will have very often psychiatrists and doctors on staff, and they'll be trying to connect the clients too. So we work a lot with ACT teams, with core services agencies. We try to bring people to primary care physicians if they have physical health issues. We assist people with supported employment program is something that we do, or rather it's a resource we connect people to for people who are interested in getting back to work, and other things like legal services and those sorts of things as well. Really, whatever issues the client is having, whatever needs they express to us, a big part of our job is to try to find ways to connect them to the right kind of resource that already exists where we are, and help them to make appointments and really kind of get back on track. So a question that they get here at the Alliance quite a lot is how supportive individuals in the community can get involved, how they can help. And it seems like the questions kind of take two forms. People who are curious about dealing with individuals one-on-one, individuals experiencing homelessness, and also people who are curious about larger sort of systems change. By the way, I should acknowledge, I know I'm speaking to there's a variety of people who were registered for this webinar. For some people will know all this already, and maybe for some it'll be new. So my experience in terms of just dealing with people that I encounter on the street is just to start out by being as kind and empathetic as possible. Sometimes I run into people who aren't particularly thrilled to see me, or might react badly. I always remind myself that well, that's not my most common experience. I think I'd be in a pretty bad mood if I was living on the street as well. And so it's important to just remember to be kind and to be generous in terms of understanding what people are really going through. It's a homelessness, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a really awful and isolating experience. It's very harmful to the individual, and it's just important to remember that people sometimes ask me about, what they can do directly. Should we be giving money to people experiencing homelessness is something I hear a lot. And my attitude is, if you have the money and you're that way inclined, it's a very personal decision. But sure, gift cards or money or to buy somebody food, I see really no harm in that. People are struggling to get through their day. Living outside, that life is very hard, and why not, if you can afford it. My feeling is always to give that without judgment. Whatever a person decides to do with that, if you've decided to generously donate something, help somebody out, that's up to them. People have self-determination, they live their own lives, they make their own choices, and I think it's just really important to respect that. So that's my attitude to that. That if people do want to get involved, they can, individually speaking to people or helping them out to get through their day. That's something that I sometimes do, and that I would encourage people who are that way inclined. And for this part, as to how people can get involved, I think it's really important to emphasize that, even though the experience of homelessness has been with us for quite a long time, it is a very solvable problem. I mean, we know the fix for this. We know how to end chronic homelessness. So really what we need is the will. We need people to come together and to make sure that resources are available. And there's all sorts of ways. I'm not an expert on that, but there's all sorts of ways of doing it. And, you could start by looking on the Alliance's website. There are policy goals on there. So we know the types of housing and the types of supports are being developed and advanced all the time, but we know the basic formula. The solution to homelessness is housing. It's surprisingly simple, and once the correct supports are in place to help support a person to transition into that housing, housing is healthcare. A person can't be well living the isolating and physically demanding experience that is homelessness, that is living outside and being disconnected. So the supports have to go along with it. It's the housing, but also the case management and the correct supports that we all need in our lives. Healthcare and all sorts of other things. So if I could encourage anyone to do anything, it would be to get involved in where you are, where you live, in changing how these things are dealt with, and just making sure the resources, there's a lot of evidence that says it's really inefficient to allow homelessness to exist in society today. It's very expensive. People living outside, crisis services are very expensive. And, some of the research suggests that it's actually cheaper to provide housing and case management than it is to, the cost to society the way we have it now. So my opinion is that really needs to change. And so I appreciate folks taking the time to tune in. And if there's any questions, I know myself and Ben will be happy to take them.
Great, thanks, Jer. Yeah, and I mean, I think we don't have any questions coming in now. Should we unmute folks, Jasper, and see if there's any questions that folks want to share?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and unmute you all, and I just wanted to emphasize too. Thank you, Jer, so much for sharing with us, and wanted to emphasize too that Jer really spoke to the balance that we want to emphasize today in terms of encountering homelessness, a balance between individual care and compassion and respect, as well as investment in systems change as well. And Jared touched on kind of the ways that we can do that as individuals, and really one of the things as development coordinator in interacting with a lot of y'all.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead and mute. Great, thanks. Sorry about that. We're going to go ahead and mute folks again because we were getting some feedback in the background. So if you've got questions, go ahead and please type them in. But as I was saying, Jer really spoke to the balance between systems change and individual relationships. And I often get questions and work with donors here. A lot of the folks that are tuning in to this webinar, partners and friends of the Alliance, I get questions a lot. Well, I don't really want to be involved in calling my representative, or I don't really want to do outreach and advocacy work. That's not really my thing. I want to know practical solutions that are things I can do, but I'm not really about that kind of change. And I just want to encourage folks, if that is where you're at, to maybe think about stepping outside that comfort zone. And certainly there are plenty of ways to serve communities and folks that are experiencing homelessness in your community apart from advocacy. And Jared touched on quite a few of those already. And there's ways to get involved serving the systems that help folks in your community. But really one of the biggest things that you can do is take time to be educated on the policy positions that organizations like the Alliance are advocating for, policies that are going to help people experiencing homelessness on a broader scale than really any of us individually are going to be able to do through our outreach or donations or giving food. And so really, I would encourage everyone to get involved, to look at organizations like the Alliance and their policy and advocacy tools and resources that'll kind of give you an idea on the first steps you need to take in reaching out maybe to your representatives or senators, or maybe being involved on a local level, engaging in town hall kinds of meetings, being educated about the policies and regulations and rules that are in place where you live. So I'm going to turn it over to any questions that you all have, or anything that Jared and Ben want to add to that.
Yeah, I guess I just underscore again so we are the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So of course we're thinking about this broadly, where we're sending out the messages saying call your senator, call your representative, looking at sort of national policy, the big funding, and of course that's a tremendous. We think it's incredibly important because it is a lot of money that's coming into communities, but obviously this is also a very local issue. So we've seen communities where the mayor or the city council has gotten on board and excited about ending homelessness. We've seen those communities make new investments, make the right kinds of investments in what works. So this is definitely a hyper-local issue as well. So there's so many different ways to get involved. And I think what Jared said is so important, which is that homelessness is a problem with a solution, and the solution is housing. For better and worse, that's both simplifies it and makes it really challenging, because it means that we know what we need to do, but what we need to do is sometimes a big ask. So, one encounter with somebody on the street is probably not going to end homelessness, but treating that person with dignity, treating them with respect, building that relationship that bears fruit over time, that helps get that person connected to the supports they need to get off the streets and get back into housing, is something that all of us can be a part of, whether that is, giving somebody some cash so they can, have a place to stay for the night that's not the shelter, or they can go grab some food in the McDonald's and get out of the rain for a little bit, or whether that's bridging a connection with the outreach people in your community, whether that's calling your representative, whether that's calling your mayor and putting it on somebody's radar, whether it's getting your friends and your family members engaged in the issues. If that's what's important, maybe you calling your representative or your mayor is not the right thing to do, but you can engage others. So I think, as Jasper said, just really finding what's your place to plug in. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but and we're not going to do this alone. But if we all pull our knowledge and our resources together, I think we can make a big difference. And so it's really just asking what's going on in your community and what's your part to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I was hoping to jump in and add too is that if you're a service provider on the call and kind of we're tuning in, thinking through, well, how do I mobilize donors or folks in my community around encountering homelessness? How do I take sort of the passion and deep interest and concern of the people in my sphere of influence and help translate that into tangible evidence and an impact on my community? One of the things that I think is really important, and one of the reasons why there was such an interest in doing this webinar was because the interactions and the relationships that folks build in encountering people experiencing homelessness and getting to know the people who live in their communities, that really is translatable into advocacy work in a way that's really impossible to replicate. And I think that we've found at the Alliance that if people have encountered homelessness, if they've experienced it previously, or if they have friends or family who have, they're much better able to articulate and tell the story in advocacy of why they are passionate about changing policy, why they're passionate about appropriations and resource allocation, and they're a lot more willing to jump in and serve your organization in a way that's going to be helpful. And so I would just encourage for those folks who are service providers looking for ways to kind of bridge that gap between individual interactions and then system and organizational support, really would encourage you to use the experiences of folks that have experienced homelessness or have friends and family who have or have just had a meaningful encounter in the recent past. Really look to bridge that gap between their individual interactions and the work and policy advocacy that they can do. So we're still waiting on any questions, and maybe if there's a problem with the webinar or something, we may not get those coming through, but please, if possible, go ahead and send those through to us through the webinar tool, and if not, we'll continue to go over some maybe some common questions or things that we hear in our work often. And I guess one of those would be, Jared, what are the challenges that you've faced in your time doing outreach, and what are the great rewards that you've experienced? What's kind of the on the best day, what can you expect, and on the worst day, what do you expect?
Sure. Well, you know, the one of the privileges of doing this kind of work is that I get to be so closely connected to folks who are, in the best case scenario, undergoing a really life-changing journey. And that brings both the best and the worst, because in some senses you share in people's triumphs and in their disappointments. And so, I mean, I guess I try to, in terms of self-care, I try to stay away from the worst case scenarios in my mind. You know, it happens, people go through some really awful stuff, and we've had clients who pass away, you know, while we're working with them, sometimes even while they're waiting on housing after they've had, they get, you know, we know that they're going to get a voucher. So we know that their life's about to change and something happened. You know, we've experienced that, unfortunately. People who have disappointment. The best days on the job are really great days. It makes me feel really, really lucky to do this job. You know, it's such a wonderful thing to see a person whose you know, whose life has taken such a bad turn that they end up living on the street. And it's always amazing to me how the diversity of experience of people who do live on the streets. You know, it's people from all walks of life and with all kinds of experience. But you know, we do occasionally have these great days. Generally, the work is more incremental, you know, and you see a person change over a year or two. But I mean, the best day has got to be the day a person gets an apartment. So I was working. I had the great pleasure of working with a man who had spent almost his entire life. He was in his 60s. He is in his 60s. He's and he had lived outside since he was a child. He doesn't remember exactly. He speculated 15 one time, but then other times when I'm talking to him, he says things that made me feel like he was close to living on the street from a really young age, you know, maybe 8 or 9 or 10, or maybe occasionally in his parents' home. It's hard to tell exactly. He doesn't remember exactly. It's more than 40 years ago. But when I first met him, he had, I think, a defense mechanism. He said, "I'm okay, you know, I've done this, I'm tough, I'm hardy." You know, he sort of said that he didn't mind what he was experiencing. And, you know, my opinion is that maybe that's some sort of defense against hope, you know, that against disappointment, you know, if he accepts. So after, you know, talking about it for some time, eventually he, you know, he decided he wanted to work on it, and he had a lot of vulnerabilities, and we worked with him, and he got matched to a housing voucher. And, you know, I was there, I got to be with him as he thought through, you know, things we take for granted. Like if I move to a new city and I'm apartment hunting, I kind of know what I want. I know what I want in an apartment. You know, do I want a big kitchen? Do I want somewhere to lock my bike? You know, do I want to live downtown? Do I want to live somewhere quiet? You kind of know all the. For him, he didn't really have that sense of, you know, he was starting from such an elementary level, and things that I take for granted in terms of what it means to have housing, you know, what that actually means. You know, it's not just bricks and mortar. You know, it really is something else. It's something that for him, he began to discover it was really part of his identity. The experience of homelessness for so long had made him feel very different. And I learned that from talking to him after he secured his apartment and was living there for a while. And at first he wasn't sure if he would stay in it, but he used to go and take a bath, and he would he painted this wonderful picture that it made me quite emotional when he first told me about it some months after he'd moved in. He'd go there during the day and he'd take a hot bath, and he would read his Bible and listen to, he likes classical music. And this was what home was for him. I asked him about it, and he said, it's a place where I can go where I have privacy. He had never had any privacy in all his adult life. He had never had privacy. He never had somewhere to go during the day to say, this is my safe space where I should close the door, shut the world off, and I can just be me, and I can decompress, and I can do the things I like and have the things I like around me. He'd had a life of all his possessions would routinely be stolen while he slept. He was beaten up while sleeping. He would wake up and he said there'd be a face an inch from his face, people like peering into his business. And for him, he still talks about how he feels like he's still, you know, the experience of homelessness is still part of who he is, but he calls it normal. He's in the process of, you know, and as a gentleman who's in his 60s, you know, it can be quite hard, as well as, you know, it can be, in answer to your question, Jasper, you know, this is both a pleasure and a difficult thing to talk to him through. But to be an outreach worker, to get to know somebody like that, and to just be present while he goes through this sort of personal change, and, you know, you see these things happening for him, you know, he starts to just have a broader sense of what's possible for him in life, and to be able to just help him think that through and help to connect him to the services that make it possible. So he stays in his apartment now, and it took him a long time to get comfortable. He still sometimes decides to go outside if the weather's nice, but it took him a long time to get comfortable to being in a bed, because he hadn't been in a bed since he was a kid. He'd be sleeping in you know, somewhere outside. So to me, that's really the best part of the job is to be present for a change like that.
Perfect. And thanks so much for sharing. And I think that really speaks to the great gift that it is to build relationships and encounter folks in our communities that are experiencing homelessness. I think so often our mentality and our default is to think of encountering homelessness as a problem or a burden. And I think maybe the condition itself certainly is a problem that can be solved, but the folks that we encounter are far more than that, and are quite a gift and a blessing. And so thank you so much, Jared, for sharing. And I think that in the absence of further questions, that seems like a great spot to end. This session has been recorded, and so we'll make sure to get it out to the donor newsletter. But if you have further questions or you're looking for further resources, we'd be happy to accommodate that. You can find more resources on the National Alliance to End Homelessness website, as well as at Miriam's Kitchen, where Jared works, if you're looking for further information on outreach or their services. So I want to thank, again, Ben Cattlenall and Jared from Miriam's Kitchen for being with us today. And thank you all so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.